All right, everybody, it is Friday, March 28th. Welcome to Pop Daily, PIX on Politics Daily. Don't forget, you can watch full episodes of PIX on Politics tonight at 6:30 p.m. right here on PIX 11 and on Sunday morning at 7:30. My guests this week on PIX on Politics are going to be Representative Dan Goldman, Congressman Dan Goldman. Talk to him about a number of things, including working with Albany to change some laws that may better impact the criminal justice system. We're also talking to Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill. She is running for governor in the state of New Jersey against a very large Democratic field of candidates over in New Jersey. We're going to talk to her about why she feels she is the one to win this one. So again, that's tonight, 6:30 p.m. But right now on Pop Daily, we're talking about housing. And it's a big issue. I mean, when we do polls and we talk to a lot of folks in the street, a big issue that's out there is affordability, but more in particular, affordability surrounding housing. I mean, you just look at the rents in New York, and they're just astronomical, right? And they continue to go up and away. So there are a number of factors that go into this, right? And we want to figure out how to bring some of these costs down, also how to advocate for yourself. So we got Nick Smith. He's the Executive Director of Communities Resist, and he is joining me today on Pop Daily. Good to see you, Nick.
Good morning. Congratulations on day number 5, I think it is.
Yeah, day number 5. And let's talk about what exactly you guys do first and foremost before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty details of some of the things. Give me a little bit of a one-on-one on what Communities Resist is.
Sure. First, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah.
So Communities Resist, or AKA CORE, is a housing legal services group. So the mission is to stop gentrification and displacement in its tracks. CORE was launched in 2019 with that mission. And we have several really talented attorneys and organizers who both represent tenants in housing court or the relevant agency for, rent reductions or apartment conditions. But we also organize buildings. So that's a unique model in terms of legal services. So we'll canvass buildings that we recognize have some building issue, like a broken boiler or rodents, rats, mold, lead, and we will help tenants set up what we call TAs. Tenant associations. Okay. So we empower tenants and represent them at the same time.
Okay, yeah, it's just pretty wide encompassing, and you guys take on a lot. So let me talk first and foremost about kind of what we're seeing play out on the landscape of New York City in terms of housing, right? The vacancy rate, 1.4%, which dropped 4.5% just in 2 years. So when you look at the landscape of New York City and kind of how there is just this historic low of vacancy rates, what does that mean for the everyday person who may be looking for housing, but more in particular, affordable housing?
Dan, that's a good question. So that vacancy rate means simply that there's just not enough housing and affordable housing for folks who need it. I think we know we have 8.6 some odd million residents. 1 million of those residents are actually renters. And so with that vacancy rate, it means that there's not enough housing and there's upward pressure on the rents. I think we all know if you ask the average person, hey, in the city, hey, do you think the affordable housing crisis we have is being resolved or solved? And most folks would say no. The average rent citywide, the median rent, is between $4,000 and $5,000 a month. Ooh. That's just not affordable housing.
Yeah, exactly. So when you look at kind of what happened in the Adams administration in his first term, I mean, he said he was going to tackle affordable housing. They went back and forth on the City of Yes plan, which finally got approved, right, which is going to bring 800,000 units over the next decade. But the big question is when, and is that sufficient, and when will they break ground? Because every single mayor has always said they want more affordable housing. It's just actually getting shovels in the ground and making it happen. What did you think of the City of Yes plan?
Yep. Good question. So before the City of Yes, I'll just say we need some 500,000 units to catch up with, what residents need. And City of Yes is purported to get about, I think, 80,000 units out of that 500,000. But to your point, Dan, shovels in the ground. No, you're good. But shovels in the ground, that's the key point. We can pass a local, rezoning shift or a citywide rezoning shift. But the question does become, how do we move these projects that is smooth, efficient, and builds a housing that are targeted at the income levels of the people who live in these neighborhoods, which is a huge issue.
So were you satisfied with the proposal that came through that was approved?
I think there were some parts of the plan that were admirable. So, for example, you mentioned my organization, CORE. What the council did, by the way, they came back and added into City of Yes, and they called it City of All, some monies for legal services groups to help folks stay in their homes. That's a great thing for orgs like CORE. When we talk about the unit counts, 80K units is admirable as a goal. But to your point, Dan, we need much more. So the question to me isn't, is this one rezoning a shift enough to meet the need, the demand?
Yeah.
The question for me is the city, is the state, and frankly, is the federal government all working together to hit that 500,000 mark in the next decade?
And I'll get to the federal government in a second, but I want to stay with New York and New York State, for example, too, right? Because it's
Sure.
a joint operation between New York State and New York City. And you guys said that New York City and New York State must respond by looking at some key things. And since the pandemic, we've heard a lot about these office conversions, whether or not that's a reality that can actually happen. Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine was running for comptroller. He says he's all in favor of converting these offices. So do you see that actually happening? And how do you kind of figure out which ones are best and which ones become affordable?
Yep. I think we need to have what I call an all-in approach, or all hands on deck approach in terms of how to get this housing. Let me just say, it's not just building housing. We've got to build and preserve units. So I think we all know New York, we're kind of short of land to build on. There's some city properties, there's other lots we can build on. But we also got to look at how do we have enough subsidy coming from the feds and the state and the city to preserve current units. So what I would say is, frankly, the governor, the mayor, and frankly, the feds, they all have to look at our numbers discreetly and figure out where are we and move forward. When you talk about Albany, by the way, there's a couple of ideas that are helpful. For example, there's something called TOPA, which is the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And that simply means if you live in a huge development and your landlord wants to sell the building, you all as tenants, with of course city help, you mentioned city, you have the first chance to buy that building with city help. That's a great idea. When we talk about other models of keeping units affordable, let's talk about the what we call the social housing model, things like community land trust that will receive buildings and build and keep them affordable and in perpetuity. There's another unique idea, by the way, coming out of the state and the city level, which is getting the state to themselves be responsible for building this housing. And that's unique because we talk about all these problems in the private housing market.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we try to think about supplementing that private market with getting the state to build housing? And somebody say, well, hold on. If government is going to build housing, look at NYCHA as an example of a failure, and they will be correct. But that doesn't mean we need to do something different. So to your question, we have to have an all above approach.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's the federal government component to it that kind of comes into play right now. And it seems that every day we wake up and there's some sort of executive order that has come out of the Trump administration, one of them being that there were already cuts to HUD, which is the housing for urban development. So cutting fair housing rules, which you might say can discriminate in renting and buying, right? So when you look at the landscape of where the federal government kind of comes into this, what did you make of that?
You're raising a great point. So I encourage folks to reread Project 2025. In fact, what's happening, what was in the document is in fact being implemented. So yes, you're right. That document and now the Trump team, they're cutting all kinds of housing programs. So we can see cuts to our housing vouchers, which help keep people in their home and prevent homelessness. We can see cuts to emergency assistance when folks are subject to evictions. And to your point about fair housing, we're seeing attempted cuts to any attempts to stop housing discrimination, which also prevents people from getting into homes and maintaining their homes. And so yes.
So to that point, Nick, who would need to stand up there? Would it be the mayor or the governor that needs to say, hey, you can't do this? And if it is the mayor, are you looking at what's happening right now in terms of the election cycle saying, okay, we are either going to support Adams or go through somebody else who may be able to stand up to the president and get this done?
I think any person who's elected to office in the state or city of New York has to be yelling very loudly. And we see how we can have some success in being loud and vocal about these issues. And let's be clear, the leader of the federal government, the president, is in fact from Queens. He's from New York City. So he's seen decades of this housing problem. He knows what's going on. And I think there's some attempts to, attach himself to, some, political label. But the reality is every elected at every level is going to be held accountable. So to your point, absolutely the governor, for sure the mayor. But I would add to that, all council members, all state, Senate, and Assembly persons all need to be so loud talking to HUD and the White House about don't cut this funding. In fact, we need to increase funding for the preservation and building of housing.
Yeah. All very interesting. This conversation not going anywhere anytime soon, going away anytime soon. So this is just the tip of the iceberg for your first appearance, but I want to keep this conversation going with you, Nick, and find out where we are in a couple months, okay?
Absolutely. I would love to.
Good stuff. Nick from Community Resist, great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
All right. And it is a very important topic, everybody. So we're going to stay on top of the housing story. And of course, we have others along the way. You know, Monica Morales is always making things happen, and she's always paying close attention to housing in particular as well. But that was a great conversation with Nick. Don't forget, PIX